Alright everybody, in this video what I'm going to be doing is showing you how to install a Caswell epoxy tank sealer system in this motorcycle fuel tank. This one is actually off of a 1980 Honda CX500 that I'm working on. And the reason that we're doing this is because there are a bunch of holes in this tank, and I specifically chose this kit for a couple reasons which we'll go over here in a second. So what we're going to go over in this video is, of course, we're going to talk about the system itself, some of the different types of tank liners you might encounter, when you need a tank liner, and especially when you don't need a tank liner, because this is not a simple answer here. We're going to go over the prep work necessary to install one of these. We'll talk about the tools that we need. I'll go ahead and do a demonstration of installing it, and then we will take a look at the results, and finally talk about some tips and tricks before wrapping it up. So anyway, let's get right into the video. Okay, now first order of business, when you need a tank liner and when you don't. Now this tank, it looks really good on the outside. It doesn't have a single ding in it, but it has a bunch of holes in it, as I will show you here. Unfortunately, it's all around the internal weld seam on this thing. I haven't seen one do it like this, but it's not something I want to try to patch from the outside. Another option would be to try to source another tank, but this one's color matched to the bike. It's in really good shape. I'm not going to be able to find another one for less than, an arm and a leg. So this is the most cost-effective solution for this thing. Now, a bike that's been sitting for a while might have some varnished fuel, might turn some of the tank into some flaky mess. You can get all that out. And if that's the case and you can clean up the tank, there is no need for an actual tank liner. So not every scenario is going to necessitate a tank liner itself. If there's light surface rust, something like that, I suggest you try to clean it up. Now, I have made multiple videos in the past, one specifically on this tank, with using an aggregate, something like, fish tank gravel, or here, like some screws and BBs and stuff. Or you can do a chemical process such as electrolysis, which is very cost effective and very hands off. You just let the chemical do the work. Works really well. In that instance, you're going to preserve the metal, you're going to remove all the rust, and it's going to leave you with a good surface for which you can run fuel through. You can clean the tank up just fine, run a filter in it as normal, and you shouldn't have any problems. But there are instances such as this where you have holes, or you might have excessive flaking in the tank and some bigger issues. So you need to go ahead and try to rectify those things. Another instance might be on a custom application where you are doing, let's say, a flush mount fuel cap. I did one in the past, and that absolutely required a fuel tank liner. So that's another time where you might actually need one versus when you don't. So definitely try to consider your needs here, and what I suggest is that you consider a liner as a last resort, because these things suck to remove. It is a lot more work to strip out an old failed liner than it is to just prep your tank and clean it up and do it right the first time. So that's kind of my 2 cents on that one. But on to the next topic. Now, I have used multiple tank lining systems in the past, such as KBS. I've done a number of tanks in that. POR15, I've also done numerous tanks in that. And now I'm moving on to Caswell, because this one is an epoxy based. And the reason I want to use it for this particular tank is that it's a lot thicker. And the thickness is what I'm after, along with the rigidity that the epoxy offers. Now, the KBS and the POR15 kits, those are thinner, and they are a polyurethane based lining system. And that's a little bit more flexible, and it's just a lot thinner. Now, I'm not sponsored by any of these companies. They have no idea I'm making this video, so don't feel like I'm preaching one over the other. They can all be perfectly good, but this also depends on your requirements here. For me, I've mentioned these large holes in the tank, and that is why I want a thicker epoxy-based sealant to help, kind of block those holes off, because I just want to keep this from going any further. Now, KBS and POR15 require a lot more of an in-depth kind of prep process, and they will actually include some of the necessary chemicals that you need to properly prep the tank, whereas the Caswell seems to be a lot more kind of relaxed in what they require. So that might be an added benefit for you guys, but regardless, it doesn't matter what system you go with. You want to make sure you follow the directions to the T and do everything exactly as they say. I can't stress this enough. Prep is absolutely the most important topic that we could possibly talk about here. So let's move on to that specifically. Now, I mentioned that we did do a video on this thing on actually removing the rust in it, and that's when we really discovered all of these holes. I used an aggregate method, and again, I've mentioned that I have done videos on my electrolysis method. Pick whatever one you want. Everybody's going to have a different way of doing it, but as long as you do it and you do it right and you get the tank clean, that's all that matters. So take your time here on the prep. Now, before we get started on this thing, what I have done, I mentioned we cleaned the tank out. There's no flaky rust in this thing. It has a very, very light kind of like dusting of potential surface rust, and that's going to be perfectly fine for this. I had cleaned it out yesterday. There's no kind of loose debris in this, and I flushed it out with a little bit of acetone, some denatured alcohol, and then I made sure I got it dry, and it has been sitting for about 24 hours now. There's no moisture in it, and there's no excessive rust, anything like that. So this is going to be a good surface to work from. So I've also taken some time and I've taken a wire wheel and I've cleaned around the actual fuel cap sealing surface here, so we've got rid of any kind of rust on that. And now it's time to actually do some work on this thing. So let's go over the tools needed. Now, getting started with what you need, of course you're going to need a tank lining kit. Now this one from Caswell, it's epoxy based, has an epoxy resin as well as a hardener, so that is just pretty self-explanatory there. This comes in a variety of colors and you can pick whatever one you want. I don't really think it matters. It's just up to you. I don't think you're going to be at a show showing anybody your red tank liner inside, but whatever. That's just, you know, that's whatever you want to do. Now to mix this, I have just a cut up little jug here. It's nice and clean, so I made sure I took some time there. After that, we're considering protection for the paint here, because if you drip this stuff on there, it's going to be pretty difficult to remove. So what I normally do is coat the actual tank in a lot of carnauba wax, and then from there I'm actually going to use just some plastic cling wrap. We're going to wrap the tank up, tape it, and make sure that anything that drips onto our cling wrap is the first line of defense, and if it gets below that, it's got to hit a liquid barrier of my actual carnauba wax. That typically works really well, so that's what I'm going to do here. Now another thing you're going to want, just some random blocks of wood. You're going to want to get this tank kind of positioned how you need it whenever it's time to finally let this thing dry, because you're going to be letting it sit over a drain pan or a little drip tray, which I'm going to show here, so nothing fancy again. And then of course you're going to want some disposable gloves, because again, this is it's going to make a mess no matter which way you do it. So you're also going to need some tape and just some general stuff in the shop, but that's nothing you should be able to figure out. Now on whatever tank you will be working on, you're of course going to have an actual outlet for your fuel. You might have an outlet or a hole for your fuel level sensor. You want to make sure you remove all of that. But you need to block all of this stuff off. So whether it be duct tape or something, duct tape or Gorilla Tape, whatever you want to use. For these, I get lucky. I actually have some thread-on caps that I can install. But I've made plenty of block-off plates in the past for various tank styles. You just bolt them on. I usually use maybe a little bit of silicone or something like that. And that works perfectly fine as well. For us, we're just going to be using this simple cap. We only have one outlet, real easy, and then we'll end up taping the top here. But for now, I will shut up and we'll get to work. Alright, now first up we're going to go ahead and start sealing the tiny little pinholes that we have. I've mentioned those, so I'm just going to use a little bit of denatured alcohol here, a little pad, and around the areas where we have that, I'm just going to make sure we get it nice and clean. What I've also done to these is I've taken my Dremel with like a stainless steel wheel, and I've got them down to bare metal right where they are. Green tape is what I have, so that's what we're going to use. We'll just get that on there as good as you can. This is just so thin already, I just can't even imagine trying to weld this. That would just cause so many more problems. So what we'll do is we'll try to get a color match paint and just touch it up and hide it the best we can. This is not a show bike. This is just going to be a rider. But in the name of preservation and fixing things, that's why we're doing a liner. Okay, that is it for our taping. So you can tell everything is along this weld seam right here, which goes onto the inside. Really interesting. I've never seen one do that, but that's what we got. All right, next up we'll go ahead and put our cap on this. So this is just a brass cap. You can get these on Amazon. Just search whatever size thread you need. And then for me, I'll just put a little O-ring right here. I will drop said O-ring and we'll go get it. We have found said O-ring and we are putting it on here again. Nobody breathe. Hand tight's all we need. Alright, next up we will put our carnauba wax on here. It's turtle wax, it's green. Okay, alright. I see you. Guys, I'm not sponsored by like literally anybody, so don't feel like I'm trying to shove products down your throat here. Wow, it looks like Bondo. Yeah. I'm just laying it on thick, just like my jokes. All right. That was one of those moments where I should have my gloves on. Alright, get our plastic wrap out here. Now, some filler necks extend up a lot further and would make this job a lot easier, but I think what I'm going to have to do is probably just tape completely around it. So yeah, I'm going to cut through this. And make sure we get this thing sealed up the best we can. In this instance, like, I'm not fearing it dripping for pouring in. It's whenever I go to roll it over, what can possibly seep out, because we do want to get some on that surface right there, and that could cause us to have issues. All right, to be continued. All right, I added a bunch more tape, just basically went around there. I kind of just, I lost control. I don't know, it's fun looking, you know, I just gotta use it. You can't stop, so. All right, well, I was rudely interrupted by a dead battery on the camera, so got the GoPro fired up. We're about ready to start pouring our chemical in and rolling this thing around. So you wanna block out about 30 minutes for this. And you want to just take your time. So turn your phone on silent, get a podcast going, get your AC cranking, and you're just going to be doing this. Rolling it all over. I always have a flashlight and usually a mirror, and I'm peering inside of here and just making sure that I'm covering all of the areas that I need. And then when we're closer to being finished, I have a little paintbrush here that I will be just kind of touching up all of this area and maybe pushing it around a little bit. So I'm going to get my gloves on, we'll get the stuff mixed up and pour it in. So we're going to pour it, and then we're going to mix it for at least 2 minutes. We're going to make sure we get it as thoroughly mixed as possible. The resin. going to gently stir. Alright, we're almost ready to pour this in. Took me a few seconds to move the camera and get it set up, but we're past our 2-minute mark. Looks pretty consistent. So here we go. This is not the moment to feel like you forgot something. And now we start. One of the more tricky areas is always the backbone, but right there. If you guys have ever seen the movie The Blob, let's try to reenact that. You're running over little villages, chasing after Steve McQueen. We're running from him, I don't know. Spend a little bit of time rolling it along the top side of the tank. I won't be able to see what it's doing yet, but we'll get a mirror in there. It'd be kind of cool to stick like an Insta360 in with a light through the filler cap and actually do this, but you'd be sacrificing a camera at that point. Alright, now I'm going to kind of peek in here with a mirror and see if I've missed anywhere. So this stuff covers well. It really does. And I've got a little bit right here on the back side of the filler neck. Re-roll it upside down. I need a director to tell me where to point the camera. Okay. This is where those wood blocks come into play. So as of right now, everything is going to start accumulating to the underside of the filler neck. So it's going to kind of fill in all the seams around there. So what the hell, let it sit like this for a little bit before it will drip out. All down there in the corner. Overall, you know, it's definitely tacking up pretty good right now. That's the consistency of gum. So, not bad. Alright, well, I've just been working on making sure everything is covered up, and we are looking pretty good. So, it has actually stopped dripping out of the bottom, and this is already getting hot as it starts to cure. So, once this thing is fully hardened, I can go in and just clear out the remaining area in the actual, you know, fuel filler hole or the petcock hole, and just make sure that's, you know, opened up to the correct diameter. So now it's time to let this thing sit, and per the Caswell instructions, you want to leave this tank in between 70 and 90 degrees Fahrenheit and allow it to cure for 24 to 36 hours before putting fuel in it, which is actually a lot faster than, say, your KBS or POR15, which typically I wait about a week just to be safe. So another thing, they do note that avoid the use of fuel additives that contain methylene chloride or like Lucas gas treatment, mineral spirits like Marvel Mystery Oil. Stabil ethanol treatment is okay to use. If in doubt, avoid. So a few precautions. Epoxy will differ from, let's say, a polyurethane. So anyway, that's kind of it for this thing. We'll come back and I will unwrap this thing. We'll see how we did. So far so good. I don't see any evidence of any kind of drips or anything like that. Of course, I know I didn't drip anything on it, but you definitely want to take the extra precaution to save yourself some time should you actually drip some. I think what I'll do here is I will actually keep the tape on until the epoxy is completely dry, so we'll give this at least 24 hours before we pull the tape off. That way it doesn't try to pull it back through the hole or anything like that. We'll just give it all the time that it needs. Alright, it's been about 48 hours since we poured in the liner, and right now this thing is fully set. You could actually put fuel in it. So here's our drip tray, which is hard as a rock. Can't even like scratch it with your fingernail or anything, so pretty tough stuff. So I just went ahead and peeled the tape. Everything looks good. And then I also went a step further and I had to go ahead and clean out the petcock hole to fit the actual, petcock filter here. So kind of show you guys how I did that right now. All right, I have this thing cleaned up. I don't know if you can see in there. What I started with was a die grinder. just kind of opening it up and getting it, you know, pretty round. And then what I did is I just took my drill and then just stepped up the drill bits until my actual fuel filler straw, or my petcock straw, fit in perfectly. So at that point, that's where I want to stop. And inevitably, it's going to take off enough of the material where it goes down to metal again, because it is such a tight fit for these Hondas particularly. So anyway, it's just kind of nature of the beast. And then what I did on the outside here, I just made sure that this sealing surface was free and clear of any debris, because the O-ring that's on the petcock seals on this outer lip, not on the inside where the last of that epoxy is. So we don't have to worry about the inside there, just this outside sealing ring. That's where we need to have a good clean fit. But now that that's done, I think this thing's good to go. So what I'll do is go ahead and throw some water in it, and we will just check for any remaining leaks or anything like that, but I don't foresee us having any. But I also just want to go ahead and clear out all of the, you know, small pieces of debris of the epoxy from actually, you know, putting the drill in here, because it did put a few inside. I've already used the air compressor to just kind of force as much of it out as I could, but there's going to be some residual stuff in there, so we'll clean it out and we will check for leaks at the same time. Alright, that's to the brim. Now of course fuel will find a hole more than water, but this is still a good test. I think we're good. Alright, we have successfully lined this tank, and that means that we have saved another tank as well. So this was definitely a success story. Now, I have had tank liners fail in the past, and that kind of brings me back to the beginning here. I had some do's and don'ts, or some tips here. A liner is not for every situation. Just because you have a dirty tank or something like that, or even a new tank, does not mean you need a sealer in it. So you have to use your best judgment here. And a lot of people will just suggest using a liner, but again, it's not a universal thing. So for us, again, to review, we had some large holes in this thing, and I needed to seal those holes because finding a replacement tank was going to prove to be very difficult and very expensive. And the bike that we're working on is not worth much money, so it doesn't make sense to just buy a really expensive tank for a really cheap bike, you know, and a lot of people would be in that same situation. So I wanted to use something thicker, like the Caswell system with the epoxy, to seal those larger holes. Now, there are other kits online that are thinner, they have different uses and stuff like that, but that is up to you to decide. So again, use your best judgment. If you can get the tank clean and get it down to, you know, pretty much bare metal, maybe slight surface rust, something like that, the chances are you probably don't need a liner. But if it's flaky, if it's got a couple holes in it, of course, yeah, you really need to start thinking about it at that point. That's really one of the biggest things, is that you don't always need one. But when you do need one, you have options. Now, as I've said, I've done numerous tank lining setups. I've used the KBS on more than a handful of bikes. I've used the POR 15 on more than a handful of bikes. And now the Caswell. This is the second time doing this one. I really like this system. It is, it seems a lot more straightforward. The KBS and POR 15, likely the same manufacturer, comes in a very similar kit, but that has a lot more involved steps. Now, that kind of takes me into some do's and don'ts. Now, if you do decide that you need a liner and you go to install one, the most important rule, number one, read the directions. These are critical. Every manufacturer is different. Do not assume that you know better than them. So read the directions and follow them to a T. Again, this is very crucial. Most of the tank lining failures that you will see is because of poor prep, or they didn't follow the instructions. That's ultimately what really happens. So follow those to a T. Number two, take your time. So this is a very labor-intensive process, and sometimes, like let's say example the KBS or POR 15, there's a lot more involved steps with it, and a lot of those are very time sensitive. So you have to actually make sure you set, like on your calendar, you block off a big chunk of time to allow yourself to get all of these things done. Because you don't want to have to get into a rush with it. You have to do it correctly for it to work. Otherwise, you're going to cost yourself a lot more time, and a lot more headache, and a lot more money. And as a third tip, if it feels like this is something that is maybe out of your ability to do, or you're not confident in doing it, don't be afraid to ask somebody, maybe approach a shop or something to do it. They will likely be able to do it for you, and they might have a recommendation for you that you hadn't thought of before. So don't be afraid to reach out and ask for help. That's always important. Now, hopefully you guys found this video very helpful. I know I've been requested many times to do a tank lining video, so hopefully this video fulfilled that request. But if you have any questions, leave them below. I'll do my best to answer. I will link, of course, Caswell, as well as a couple other companies that offer tank lining systems in the description, at least ones that I have used. And beyond that, give the video a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and check some other videos out on the channel. I'd really appreciate it. I have full videos on everything that I do. This particular video will be in a playlist for this CX500 that I am reviving. So be sure to check those videos out if that is something that would interest you. If not, I've got a ton of other videos on the channel to keep you guys busy. So again, hope you guys like this one. Hope to see you in the next video. Thanks for watching.